Thanks, everybody, for coming. What could be more fun than talking school finances on a cold winter night, right? Right? Talk about exciting. That must mean you guys really care about this issue because you came out on this cold winter night, and it is an important topic. So, welcome. My name's Tim Hundt. I'm the editor of VernonReporter.com, and but this event's put on by Kickapoo Conversations, and some of you folks might not know who that is, and we did a forum similar to this last summer. Some of you might have been to that. That was called DC to the Driftless, talking about the potential federal cuts and what the impact could be locally, and that was pretty well received. So Steve was the guy that pulled this together. Steve is a part of our group. Kickapoo Conversations is a very loose-knit group of folks that meets once a month right over here at Borgen's, and we have breakfast, and Borgen's is very accommodating. We show up sometimes and we have no idea how many people are going to show up, and they do a great job of taking care of us. But it's a great organization because there's really no set agenda, and we show up and we talk about whatever is happening in our communities. So we have people from hospitals and schools and teachers and Cooley Cap and WIDA and nonprofits and you name it. Danny shows up, the mayor here, and different group each time usually, and some great conversations. So we try to address things that are on our mind. And every once in a while we come across an issue like, well, hey, maybe we can do something about that. So in the past we did a housing summit. I think you did something around child care. We're actually under an organization called Wisconsin Partners, and we had their board out, and we took them on a tour of the watersheds. So we try to take on issues when we feel like there's something we can do or have an impact. What else was I going to talk about? So some housekeeping. I'll give you a little bit about the format here tonight. First of all, remember, turn your cell phones off if you haven't done that already. We're just going to give about 3 to 5 minutes to these folks. I'll introduce them in a second. These are all education-related people from our area that have a way more knowledge about this than I do. And so, the goal here tonight is this is not partisan, but school finances are complicated. And, I see a lot of people in here that are board members and associated with schools and so forth. You guys probably already know that. But, I've been going to school board meetings, as a journalist for 25 years. And my dad was on the school board. My brother was the president of the school board. And I can tell you that these are really complicated issues. And financing at schools is a complicated business. I used to go to those meetings, and there would be a 2-3 hour meeting. And then they'd say, okay, you got 800 to 1,200 words to explain that 3-hour meeting, and don't make finances boring. So it's a really hard thing to do. So I'm glad these guys are here because they can give you a little more depth. Have that point in the meeting where you say, we don't want to get too far in the weeds. We're going to get a little bit in the weeds tonight. There are some factors that are coming together. And I think this is why Steve wanted to call this together. Actually, this developed out of a question that somebody came to him about school lunches and the number of, overdue accounts, and that developed into a conversation about, well, there's this and there's that, and it's really complicated, and we should talk to people about that and get some more information out there. So that's how this developed. There are a number of factors that are, over the last couple of decades that are increasingly putting a squeeze on school budgets. You've got, first of all, you got levy limits, and all these guys will get into this more, but levy limits, only so much you can raise the levy each year. You've got vouchers that are increasingly taking more money out of your district, and this isn't for or against vouchers. We just want people to understand what's happening with that. And then you've got, potential legislation out there that's going to impact, some things about consolidation and those kind of things. So these guys are going to get into these factors that you've seen more and more operating revenues or referendums that districts are having to go to taxpayers to say, we can't make it with our budget. We're going to have to exceed our limit, and will you let us do that? So those are the things we're going to talk about and give you more detail on that. And so over here tonight, we got Steve Michaels. He's with the Wesby Schools. We got Ryan Alderson. He's the superintendent with Cashton Schools. Jeff Eide, Executive Director, Wisconsin Rural Schools Alliance. Jeremy Hill with the Viroqua Schools. Paul Fischer, he's Director of CESA 4, Cooperative Education Service Association, is that right? Agency. All right. Yeah, we got Michele Engh, Immanuel Lutheran. Everybody knows Michele. All right. So first up, we're going to have Steve. He's going to come talk to us about revenue limits and how that system works.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the Westby area schools, and welcome to our Performing Arts Center. Just like to point out a special acknowledgement to the Fine Arts Foundation of the Westby area. It was through their generosity and their fundraising efforts that we were able to partner and build this facility. So very grateful for that organization. So I'm going to talk about revenue limits today, and I'm going to talk, I want to give you a big picture view of this, and this may be an oversimplification, but my hope is that you'll have a better understanding of what this is all about. So the revenue limit is the budget, okay? For every single district in the state of Wisconsin, they have a revenue limit, and that's their budget. And there's a very simple formula that's revenue limit minus state aid equals local taxes. So if you're a heavily aided district, and aid is built up in a lot of things from property values to your current spending to your student enrollment, on and on. But if you're a heavily aided district, your tax burden is less. And if you're not as heavily aided, there's a greater burden for our taxpayers. So once again, revenue limit minus state aid equals local taxes. So in 1993-94, a long time ago, that's when revenue limits were frozen. So you were locked in place in 1993-94, and if you were a high spending district, you stood a better chance financially of faring better than those who were frugal. So wherever you were in 1994, if you were a high spending district, you were locked in, your revenue limit is frozen there. And if you're a little bit more frugal, it was locked in at a little bit less. So for the next 16 years, that was indexed to inflation, meaning your budget grew at an inflationary rate. So things were okay. And then in 2009, revenue limits were decoupled from inflation, and that's where problems started to occur. So you have all of your regular expenses that continue to grow at an inflationary rate, but your revenue limit was stuck. And that's where that gap started to occur, and that's when we started to hear about operating referenda for the first time in a long time. And that's where a lot of the problems that we're facing now started from. So one of the things I'd like to share with you is, so we got this revenue limit now, and it grew by $325 per pupil with this biennial budget. So the revenue limit, our total budget, grew by $325 per pupil. But unlike years prior, there was no aid to accompany that. So when you apply that simple formula, here's this revenue limit that grew by $325 per pupil with no state aid, which meant that the burden on our taxpayers increased. In fact, the entire amount of that $325 per pupil is borne on our taxpayers. So that's just a quick look at that biennial budget. And any increase in school taxes is something that I'm very concerned about, all of us here are very concerned about. And part of that reason is because if you look at the situation in the Westby area school district, when we renewed our referendum last time, we asked for a renewal. It wasn't an increase, it was a renewal. So all things stayed the same, assuming you didn't build any additions, assuming you didn't have a reassessment, all those things. If it's all the same, the school taxes would have been the same. Actually, this year, our levy decreased slightly. But when that $325 per pupil came on, all of a sudden, that's borne on the taxpayers, and so that it increased slightly. So that situation is playing out, and it makes all of us nervous because we're going to have to turn around again and renew an operating referendum in November. So we're going to be educating people about that. So it places us in an interesting situation, a predicament that is a tough one to navigate these days. All right.
Can I keep you for just a second? Just to clarify a couple things? So that revenue limit, that increase is based on net new construction? Is that how that works, the property tax?
No, so the revenue limit, the increase this year, the $325 per pupil, that was part of the veto, the 400-year veto that Tony Evers put in place. So it'd be $325 per pupil per year.
Okay. You're never quite sure what that increase is going to be.
Correct.
And the operating referendums have increased quite a bit. You said, we talked on the radio this morning, so you told me a lot of this already. But how many districts in Vernon County are under an operating referendum right now?
Sure. All 6 districts in Vernon County are dependent upon an operating referendum. Kickapoo was fortunate just because they don't have to go back and ask every 3 years. Kickapoo has a recurring referendum that they passed last year. And DeSoto's in that undesirable position of having failed twice, and they're going to be preparing to go back again to pass an operating referenda. So they're in a mode where they're probably spending out of fund balance to make ends meet right now.
Yeah, just so people understand, a couple of kinds of referendums. One of them is kind of for if you want to build a building, a capital referendum, and then there's operating, which is for operating costs.
Yep. One of my colleagues will address that too, but that's a really important point that I want you to know is there's 2 different types of referendum. There's the operating referendum, which is people and programs, and there's the brick and mortar referendum, that's a capital referendum.
Okay. Thanks. Next. So next we're going to have Ryan Alderson, Cashton Schools. He's going to explain a little bit about how vouchers work and how public schools handle those.
Hi, and welcome. Thanks for coming tonight. Appreciate that you're all here leaning in, learning a little bit about public schools and how school finance works. I appreciate the engagement. I was asked to share some information tonight regarding private school voucher programs. I'll stick a little bit tight to the script because I know that there's a lot of feelings on both sides of that topic, so forgive me if I read a little bit more than what I just speak freehand. But beginning around 1989, programs have been implementing, allowing qualifying families to access public funds for private school education. Originating in Milwaukee and then expanding statewide, the use of public funds for private school tuition is becoming more common. As participation levels increase, people are becoming more aware of the programs and the costs associated with voucher programs, and they want additional information. The intent of my comments tonight simply is to provide information about participation level and costs, not to offer an opinion on voucher schools or the options that families have in making decisions about the education of their children. There's 4 programs collectively considered voucher programs in the state. 2 of them are available to students in our region. That includes the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program that currently enrolls 29,000 students. The Racine Parental Choice Program that enrolls 4,070 students. The Wisconsin Parental Choice Program, which is the statewide program, accessible to students in Vernon and Monroe County region and across the state. That currently enrolls 23,000 students. And then the Special Needs Scholarship Program that enrolls 3,400 students. So in each of those situations, those programs provide public dollars to private school tuition. The Wisconsin Parental Choice Program provides $10,877 for each K-8 voucher student and $13,371 for each high school student. The Special Needs Scholarship Program students receive $16,049. The Wisconsin Parental Choice Program totals approximately $262 million statewide this year. The Special Needs Program adds an additional $52,215,000. All 4 programs combined result in a total cost of a little over $700 million. It's helpful to know that statewide, according to DPI data sources, that approximately half of private school students are currently accessing voucher funds to participate in their private education. So importantly, how does this impact local taxes? What does it mean for us and the people sitting in the room? The two largest revenue sources for school districts, as Steve mentioned, are equalization aid and your local tax base, your local tax levy. So the funding calculated by the revenue limit formula results from the combination of state aid and local property tax. All things staying the same, when aid is decreased, taxes increase. When aid is increased, taxes decrease. Three of the programs, including both the programs being utilized locally, are funded by a deduction from each school district's state aid, their equalization aid. Districts recover the loss of that aid through increased property taxes. The outcome for communities has been an increase in taxes as they are contributing to the education of students in both public and private education settings. The private school does not need to be located in your school district. And in addition to schools that are within driving distance from your school district, students also have the opportunity to participate in online private programs across the state. There's sometimes confusion caused by assuming that funding follows the student. In a scenario where the student was previously attending a public school, that's reasonably accurate. However, if the student was not previously enrolled in a public school, there's a new cost to taxpayers. So for example, if the private school tuition was previously being paid by parents or through private scholarships, or if those students were homeschooled students in homeschool environments. Since most of the students participating in private voucher programs were not previously attending public schools, there's a new cost to the tax base. So this year's data indicates that about 25% of new enrollees in private voucher school programs had previously attended a private school, or a public school, so 25%. There are income level caps on the WPCP program set at 220% of the federal income poverty level, which for some reference is about $69,000 for a family of four. That increases to $75,000 if that family of four includes a married couple. Those incomes only need to be qualifying upon enrollment. So once they're enrolled and accepted in the program, those qualifying numbers are no longer relevant. This year, voucher students from any one district under the parental choice program are capped at no more than 10% of your enrollment. Those caps do come off at the end of this school year, so we'll see how that rolls out. The other challenge that we run into is that school districts don't have a way to predict the number of students that are going to participate in voucher programs each year. The information as far as participation is concerned isn't received until October, after most districts have posted their preliminary budgets and some have already had their annual meeting of electors. The information does not include information about students, rather just the aid amount that will be deducted. This can, and often does, result in an unexpected increase in the tax levy from the previous year and from budget estimates. In most cases, the costs for voucher programs are not itemized on public tax bills and are instead lumped with the public tax school line on your taxes. So for context, with some digging, I was able to find data on the number of local students and aid transfer for school districts in Monroe and Vernon County. So if you bear with me, I'll read those off just for your own personal information. So for schools in our area, what we have again is the number of students just in the WPCP program, and then the combined transfer amount for WCP and the special needs scholarship program. So for the school district of Cashton, this program affects 20 students with an aid transfer of $232,504. DeSoto includes 18 students, $237,357. Hillsborough has 5 participating students for $59,373. Kickapoo has 7 students, $83,621 students. Sorry, dollars. That'd be a lot of students. Lafarge, 7 students, $76,139. Norwalk, Ontario, Wilton, 29 students, $336,923. Sparta has 104 students for $1.3 million. Toma has 62 students, $841,686. Viroqua has 97 students, $1.08 million. Westby has 48 students for $601,261. So again, we're not here to tell you that voucher programs are good or bad, but it's important to know that throughout the region there is an impact on your local tax costs. There's differing opinions on the concept of publicly funding private schools. Regardless, it's a significant investment of public funds that continues to grow annually, and people should pay attention to that. Thank you.
Yep.
My question is for Mr. Alderman.
Can-
You have some really important information, detailed information I couldn't absorb. It appeared like you were reading something. Is there a way that what you were reading from I could see?
Sure. Probably. Talk afterwards. Yeah. So, one of the things I didn't mention was, did you all get a card when you came in for a question? Okay. We've got folks that'll get you a card. So if you have a question, please write it on a card. And we did it this way last time. It worked pretty well. We'll take your questions and we try to consolidate them so we don't repeat the same questions. And we'll do that after everybody's done talking. And we are recording this. So for you also, that last time I posted it on my Vernon Reporter YouTube channel, and Jeremy is back there recording now, so I think we'll get that posted as well. So if you've got family members that you want, friends and family that want to watch this, they can do that later. Okay, Jeff Eide with Wisconsin Rural Schools Alliance. He's going to talk to you about consolidation. There's a number of bills in the legislature that are related to consolidation. He will tell you all about that.
Who's next? Okay, I got to turn this down. Short people need to move it down. The good thing about being short is my paper's really close to me. I saw Ryan looking down there before. Well, thank you. You're going to hear it a number of times, but thank you for being here tonight. This is not an endorsement per se for anything that I'm saying, but more of an informational piece of the consolidation bills that are out there. Currently, there are six essentially out there at this time. I'm going to give you the big picture of what they are, and then I'm going to try to dive into them a little bit. I'm not going to read the bills per se. I'm going to hit the money piece of it. That's usually where we want to go anyways, what impact it has. So AB 644 is called a Consolidation Incentive Aid. AB 645 is a feasibility study grants. AB 646 is a statewide consolidation study. AB 647, whole grade sharing grants. AB 648, levy rate equalization aid. And then AB 649, which basically makes all the packages work. That's an appropriations bill, essentially. So AB 644 is Consolidation Incentive Aid. And in the past, we've had that. It's been on the books at $150 for 5 years per student for 5 years. That has been adjusted in the AB 644 and proposed as the first year for consolidated districts, $1,500 per pupil. And then the year 2 would be $650 per pupil, and then 3 through 7 would be $150 per pupil. So a little bit of an example, or basically up to $2,150 per pupil in the first 2 years. A little example would be 700 students, down a little bit. The first year would be, if you had 700 students, $1,050,000 would be the first year, and the second year would be $455,000. So that's the AB 644. AB 645 is the feasibility study grants. So this is where districts can study consolidation before they continue, before committing to anything, and that's up to $25,000 per consortium. The eligibility costs must have financial analysis, enrollment, population studies within that. Requires a school board to have a resolution to consider the consolidation. Informed local decisions at that time. AB 646 is the statewide consolidation study. That's really nothing with the schools except for it requires the Department of Public Instruction to analyze statewide opportunities and trends for consolidation. This includes district boundaries, facility conditions, staffing levels, 10-year enrollment projections, and then DPI would report the findings to the legislators. AB 647, it's whole grade sharing. That's actually on the docket, but I think it moved up in price. Revives a flexibility voluntary option for districts. It's a 4-year grant at $500 per pupil for sharing grades. And it's not sharing some students because there's a lot of shared services going on with our rural schools throughout the state. But if I'll go to my districts. If Whitehall, we at Blair Taylor, we moved all our 3rd grade over to Whitehall, that would be a whole grade sharing, a 3rd grade or something like that, where they were taught in a different district. AB 646 is a statewide consolidation. Oh, I did that already. AB 647 is the whole grade. Sorry, skip that. Can you edit that out of there and put that in there? Okay. AB 648 is the levy rate equalization aid. It addresses the barriers to consolidation with unequal property taxes. So if the levy was lower in one district, higher in another district, it would start out with the district that's lower, because you'd go to the higher rate, there'd be 100% of that for the first year, and then 80%, 60%, 40%, 20%, 0, so it would be a big hit at that time for the levy. Counts as general aid and reduces property taxes, they say. I have an example I'm not going to go through on what that would look like, but basically that's it. AB 649 makes the packages work. It provides $5.95 million total, like whole grade sharing would cost about $2.7 million. Levy equalization aid, about $3 million. Feasibility study for the state, $250,000, for a total of $5.95. I don't think this has been taken up by the joint finance at this time. Little bit of takeaways from my end. It's voluntary, locally driven solution or decisions, financial incentives, not mandates, support taxpayers through tax equalization, supports planning before decisions are made. It does target the rural areas, and it does target K-8s at times too, throughout the state. And I say that because obviously if you're a larger school district, you're not going to be consolidating two really big school districts usually. Little side note I have, in the last 5 years, or last 20 years, there's only been 5 districts, full districts that have consolidated, and I believe it's actually only 6 in the last 30. There's not many that have consolidated. There are a few discussing it at this point in time, but nothing's on the books there. Also, public hearings have happened in the Assembly, but they have not happened in the Senate. So I haven't seen anything, so there's not movement in the Senate side right now that I've seen. That is all I have. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you for that. Next up, we have Jeremy Hill, Viroqua Schools, and he is going to talk more about referendums and the differences in the types of referendums.
I don't know that I need to do that, Tim, because you and Steve handled most of that. So unlike many other states where school budgets are set entirely by elected boards or state legislatures, Wisconsin law places certain financial decisions directly into the hands of the voters. A referendum asks a fundamental question: what is the appropriate level of local taxation to support our local schools? It is a decision that requires us all to weigh the educational goals of a district against the economic realities of households and businesses. So, as Steve was talking about, since 1993, Wisconsin has operated under revenue limits. These limits cap the amount of money a school district can receive through state aid and local property taxes. When a district's projected costs, driven by inflation, aging infrastructure, or declining enrollment, exceed that state-imposed cap, the district has 2 primary paths. And they talked about operating referenda, and they talk about the capital referenda. But when you're thinking about how we manage that cap, we can do two things. We can have fiscal contraction, which is where we reduce staff, or we consolidate programs, or we defer maintenance to stay within the existing limit that we have, or we offer the voters the choice of a referendum, which asks them for permission to exceed that limit that Steve talked about. This system was designed to give taxpayers the final say, ensuring that any significant increase in local property taxes for schools is explicitly approved by the people that are paying them, not by us at the school district. Every referendum involves a question. It's important to know exactly what is being asked. And sometimes we're looking at a capital referendum, which is that bricks and mortar piece. It's about fixing a leaky roof or updating a 1950s science lab or ensuring that our buildings are safe and secure. Other times, it is an operational referendum, and this is for the people and programs. It's what pays for the art teacher, the AP history class, the football coach, and the electricity that keeps the lights on. Whether it's recurring, meaning a permanent change, so similar to where Kickapoo is, or non-recurring, a temporary bridge, these funds stay in our local classrooms. The most important part of this process, though, is transparency. So I'm going to remind you to look closely at the district's financial reports, the specific language of the ballot question, and the projected tax impact. As healthy communities, we know that we have to have transparent conversations when it comes to referenda, and that those fact-based debates are what help us be successful.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next, we got Paul Fischer with CESA, and he's going to talk about a couple of bills, Act 25 and Act 20, the math bill and
Early literacy.
and reading bill.
Thank you. I'm going to take 30 seconds to give a shameless, not a plug, but just to explain a little bit about CESAs, because they are a big part of the work that happens with our administrators. CESA 4 is in West Salem. We're one of 12 CESAs in the state of Wisconsin. We serve 26 districts in CESA 4, going down to Lafarge, over to Royal, Black River Falls, all the way up to Elma along the river, back down around La Crosse, Onalaska, Holman. So we serve 26 districts, but the important part of this is we are connected closely with the Department of Public Instruction, and we talk about their initiatives, and some of these things you've talked about today we talk about, and then it's my job in our regions and CESAs to take it to our districts and their administrators to talk about the work that the DPI is looking to do. So again, not many people know when you talk about a CESA what it is, so I just wanted to add that context for tonight. So again, thank you for being here. This is a great opportunity for us to share our knowledge and answer any questions that you might have. So again, I am talking about Acts 20 and 25, which are the early framework for early literacy. Act 20 is around reading and English, and math is around Act 25. They represent a statewide shift toward evidence-based early literacy instruction in both reading and math for students in grades 4K through 3. Currently, Act 20 related to early literacy was passed into law in 2023. Act 25 related to math literacy has not been passed into law at this time. The goal of the legislation is to improve literacy outcomes through standardized screening, teacher training, and targeted student intervention. The mandates do apply to all Wisconsin public and independent charter schools. Acts 20 and 25 establish that framework for foundational instruction, as I said, in grades 4K through 3. The early literacy bill around Act 20 focuses on improving reading outcomes through standardized screening, targeted interventions. Act 25 is being proposed to mirror that same approach. Created in 2025, looks to focus on math literacy, applying similar rigorous standards to mathematics. Under the framework for both, students are screened 3 times annually, fall, winter, and spring, to monitor their progress and to see how they're doing in terms of readiness and potential risks. Students who score below the 25th percentile rank must have a personal plan developed, whether for reading or math. That includes specific evidence-based interventions and weekly progress monitoring. Local districts that are here tonight or in attendance affirm the teaching using the science of reading is crucial for student success. Districts support training teachers in research-based methods, such as Orton Gillingham, to address diverse learning needs. There are implementation challenges that districts have faced, however. While the educational goals are supported, the high cost of implementing these systemic changes remains a significant factor for local districts. So it's one of those things that you probably heard of called an unfunded mandate. So law is passed requiring districts to teach said thing, but there's no funding that comes along with it, and then districts are given that responsibility to pay for the training, pay for any materials, all the costs that come with it. So again, local leadership feels that the biggest piece that needs to happen is state-level funding to accompany these mandates to ensure that sustainable and effective implementation can happen. Again, Act 20 and 25 establish a rigorous new standard for literacy instruction in Wisconsin. Currently, the Act 25 that's related to math literacy, again, is only a proposal. It has not been passed into a law. Quite frankly, our districts that we hear from talk about the fact that it's been a lot just to get Act 20 in place, so let's give us a little more time to get Act 20 figured out before we work on getting the math piece figured out. Again, positive impact for kids, but with those unfunded mandates makes it difficult at times. Successful long-term implementation relies on balancing these high-level mandates with the practical financial realities and support needs of our local school districts. Again, thank you for having me tonight. Appreciate it.
And now we were going to have Michele Engh, pastor at Immanuel Lutheran Church. Michele is going to talk about delinquent school lunch fund accounts, which I think was the original question that got this ball rolling.
Thank you. Before I begin on my presentation, if you have questions that you've written down and would just put them up in the air, Christina will pick them up and we'll collate them a little bit so that we can start asking that after my presentation. So I'll take 1 minute to let people, if you're writing down some questions furiously. We'll ask again at the end of my presentation, so just in case you're still formulating those questions. Without seeing a whole bunch of them going up in the air, you guys must have done a great job explaining this. So yes, I'm here to address the regular question. And the reason I was asked is because in my work here at Wesby Coon Prairie, prior to becoming a pastor, I started a number of food insecurity programs to feed children, and I work closely with the district. There are a number of children in our districts who do not have food available to them. Part of this, and I'll go back to when I was a child, so very ancient history ago, my parents couldn't afford hot lunch, and if I needed hot lunch for anything, I worked in the kitchen, scraping trays and helping out in the kitchen in order to have hot lunch. Then when my children were in school, if they forgot their lunch, which they quite often did, they got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. That was also the same meal that was given out to the children who never brought a lunch and didn't have a hot lunch money. And it was pretty obvious my kids could figure out who never had lunch by the amount of times they had to go forward and have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Over the years, that causes stigma. It pretty much ensures that everybody in your grade knows who doesn't have money. And while I still like a good peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it's monotonous and it doesn't always give children the food they need to learn. And so in an effort to destigmatize the feeding programs that are so necessary for children at risk, the school district started, and this is across the board in all of our school districts, just started feeding children. And on average, kids are in school districts 14 years. That's a lot of debt. that we as taxpayers pick up because we care about children and we want children to be fed. But that is also something that has an impact on people's tax dollars. So I don't know, I've seen numbers in the past that just blow my mind out, that there's a lot of money wrapped up into it. Again, we're talking 14 years of education. Steve, I didn't ask you, what's the average meal cost today?
$2.75.
So 180 days of $3 a day times 14 years. It adds up. And there are very generous people in our community who have come forward and worked with the school district and said, we'd like to help offset the cost and given money to the school district. That doesn't always happen. And so as we talk about the answer to the question that was first asked, why do we have delinquent meals accounts, is because the school districts recognize the very great need for food nutrition. And they make sure that their children in their district are fed. Simple answer, but it is off of their funding, off their budget. It then gets passed along to us as taxpayers. Thank you for your attendance tonight. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm going to turn that over to the experts.
So while they're gathering up a few questions here, if you could bring that microphone up too for these guys, because I'm going to have them answer the questions, not me. Maybe to try and pull a little thread through this, because one of your jobs as a journalist is always go back, sit in the office and go, okay, what did they really say, you know? Wow, there's a pile of questions, okay. So I think one of the reasons these folks wanted to get this information out is just to get across how more and more difficult it is to make ends meet in your local school district. And I've been hearing this for 20 years. And it started kind of with that revenue limit. And, you know, your revenue limit only was up a little bit each year, a little 1 or 2%. And then, you know, your health insurance, 70% of your budget is probably your employees. Your health insurance goes up double digits. Your fuel costs go up. Salaries go up. The cost to keep that building in place is always going to be there. All those costs keep increasing, but that revenue limit is just not keeping up with that. Sandy, am I explaining this well enough? That's just one factor. And now you've got, you know, vouchers are increasingly taking money out of your district. Again, not for or against vouchers, it's just that's money that's leaving your district. And that's why you're seeing more and more of these districts go to an operational referendum. You really didn't see that years ago. And you saw capital referendums for building projects, but not often for operating capital. So you're seeing a pretty high percentage of districts having to go to that these days to ask their taxpayers. Yes.
I just want to say that in 2024, there was 241 referendum questions on the ballot. And then in the spring, the April and February of 25, there was 95 more. So it's statewide. If you look at the map, it's all over the state. So it's a funding issue.
And one of the tricky parts with the voucher issue is that, and I've heard this from these guys, that, you know, we all get that tax bill, right? And we open it up and go, holy cow. The voucher money leaving the district's not reflected on that tax bill. So as you heard, Viroqua Schools, over $1 million leaving your district. They feel like they're kind of getting the blame for that tax rate, and yet they're not in control of that $1 million that leaves their district. So that's one thing I know they'd like to see changed. And about how much of that leaves Vernon County, like half of that, I think it is. Is it going?
I think that's one of the hard questions to answer, Tim, because the way that voucher law works, we just know how much leaves. We don't know where it goes, always. And we don't know the students that are tied to it. So we don't always know which students are leaving, we just know the total number of students that are leaving.
All right, I'm going to try to get at these. I don't think we're going to get all of these. This is a lot of questions, but which is a good thing. I'll start with something here. How can local businesses partner with school districts to help? Anybody got an idea on that?
So I don't want to speak locally, but I will tell you that from the higher level of the high school situations, we're seeing some amazing things happening in the CTE world, career and tech ed, and our high schools are partnering with businesses throughout all of these communities, and those partnerships are getting kids in high school connected to these businesses because businesses don't have employers or employees, so they've developed partnerships with our local districts in hopes that they can train and these kiddos can go from the school into their businesses, and we're seeing amazing things happening. So business involvement at that level, 9-12, is happening, but I think I bring that up because that's an example of how partnerships can happen. If you find a need and work together and talk about this, again, using my lens, I'm just going to talk briefly, but CESA 4, we had a panel of business partners, so all of our soups were there asking questions, and it's just starting to build those relationships in each of your districts. If you're a business partner, come talk to your soups and say, how can we help? What are some major things that are happening that we can be a part of? Just starting the conversation, because I can tell you more than likely each district has different needs. But I just use the CTE world as a really great example of how we've connected our school districts to the business world, because we're preparing kids that are now going into their businesses locally, that instead of moving off or going somewhere else, they're staying locally and helping out the businesses with their skills that they've learned through high school and then through this partnership with the business.
This one, tell me if you can answer this, but how does lack of special ed funding from the federal government impact your referendum? I know there was potential cuts. I don't know where that's at right now, but does special ed funding impact public ed funding differently than voucher schools?
Let me talk just quickly about special ed funding, okay? So everyone here is going to keep teaching students who have special needs. It's the right thing to do. It's the law. We need to do this. And we're not reimbursed adequately for the costs associated with teaching students with special needs. We're going to do it. We've made that commitment. But that means that money has to come out of the general fund to backfill what was not funded appropriately. So that is the conundrum we face, and it's true in every district across the land. So the hope was that we would see in this biennial budget a 42% reimbursement and then a 45% reimbursement. Currently, it's about 30%. And we were hopeful, and it's gone in the right direction, but we're going to be lucky to hit 35, I think, by the end of the biennial budget. But I think this is something that's garnering support across the aisle. I think it's something that's will certainly lift every school district and be a benefit, every single school district, if we support special education funding to where it should be.
So I would add, when we talk about special ed funding, that there's two different types. We have some sufficient and we have some certain. Right now, we are some certain, which is the state is saying to you, this is the amount of money to all of us, to all of the school districts. This is the amount of money. Now, based on the number of students that we have in special education and what Cashton has and what Westby has and our partners across the state, they take that some certain amount and they divide it among all of us based on the number of students that we have. What we really need at the state level is some sufficient, which means that it covers the needs of all students under special education. Right? Does that make sense? Okay.
I think part of the question there too. I think part of the question there too is asking about federal special education funding. So I guess to boil that down a little bit, any source of special education funding helps us to do a better job of supporting special education students. So if we're already saying in the first parts of this response that the amount that comes in from the state mechanisms for special education reimbursement doesn't cover the cost of school districts, in your other pocket, you've got federal special education dollars. So if you have less in the federal education pocket to cover your bills and already not enough to cover your state pocket of bills, you end up in a situation where more has to come from the local tax base to fulfill the promises that you've made and are committed to doing for kids. So a threat to federal funding for special education programs is a threat to special education services in general. And all of those students, all of our students deserve the very best that we can. So I would say to continue to advocate the best that you can for special education support at both the state and the federal level.
Jeff had a thought too.
It's for private, or it's 90% reimbursement compared to the 45, and 42 and 45, which is only sufficient for private schools, or voucher schools, I should say it better.
Okay, voucher-related question. What does a private school?
It's a 90% reimbursement for vouchers. If they're having.
For specialized,
Correct.
public schools get 30% and private voucher schools get 90%, some sufficient. So they're guaranteed 90%.
Yeah, we're some certain.
And what is the requirement for voucher schools to take special ed students?
There isn't a requirement for them to take.
So that they're not permitted to discriminate as far as that enrollment process for special education, but they do not have to provide special education services to the same level as the public school. So they can make minor modifications to try to meet the needs of students, and if those minor modifications don't fully satisfy the needs of the student, then they don't have to go the extra distance to fully cover the need. So.
Good? All right, another voucher-related question here. What does a private school funded by any voucher program need to do in order to get public dollars, policies, licensing, and so on? Are they following requirements that you guys follow? How does that work?
So as far as the process of becoming a recognized participating, private school in a private voucher program, as a public school representative, that's not a process that I've gone through, of course. I mean, there is a registration process that they have to go through to make sure that they can participate in the program. So not every private school participates. So the private schools that you may be associated with or know aren't necessarily participating. The rest of the question was what exactly? Started.
Basically, what are the requirements to get those dollars, I think is what they're asking.
Mm-hmm. So they have the obligation to provide an education that the parents participating feel is appropriate for their students. So as long as there's people that are interested in having their students participate in those schools and in that program, that's, again, a little out of my depth to know exactly what they have to fulfill, but they have to register with the state to be a participant in the program and then be selected by families to enroll their children there. Want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think maybe they were talking about teacher licensing and things like that. Is the requirements the same, or is it?
No.
Or reporting?
No.
You guys have to do a lot of reporting to the state?
No. So the expectations of public schools and private schools are very different. There's a number of different ways. So anything from licensing to curriculum design to, again, special education services to providing transportation,
State testing.
participation in state testing, though I do believe voucher schools do provide those testing opportunities, but a number of families choose to opt out of that testing in a private voucher program.
And I know the intent is to keep it bipartisan, so I'm going to do that. And fact check wise, I don't have the name of the school, so that's why I'm hesitant to say, but it is factual that there is actually a voucher school that is not in Wisconsin that is receiving funds, that's actually based out of Florida, that are receiving voucher funds from Wisconsin to support students, so the students from Wisconsin enrolled in a voucher school in Florida. That is a fact. I just don't have the name of the academy, but I can certainly produce that.
Well, this one's not really related to financing, but it's are teacher unions in control of the curriculum? That's the question.
Well, I'll tell you, my incredible teacher union is here tonight, sitting interspersed throughout here, and they could probably answer that question for you. Unions are not in charge of the curriculum. If you consider the state of Wisconsin has laid out what they say that every student in the state of Wisconsin should be able to do when they graduate from high school. School districts then, under local control, are able to say, this is what we have adopted, and then when you talk to teaching staff, they determine what is a priority standard and what they have the time to teach and what they don't. If you look at all of the standards in the state of Wisconsin, in order to teach them, it would take 22 years to do that. We don't have 22 years. We have, as we said, 14 to be able to do that. So teachers and curriculum teams with parent input often have to look and see what is the most important pieces that we can teach in any given day, let alone the school year. But yeah, I will say that it is not at the will of the teachers union.
Good on that one. Question about consolidation, and we touched on this. You know, Steve and I have talked about this. It gets tricky, and there's a lot of complication to consolidation. So this one is basically about what's the effect for each school. Is it permanent? Are there reduced costs? Do the kids have to travel farther? So maybe just talk about some of the layers there to, if you are considering, you know, our county has a number of schools that are close to each other, smaller enrollments, and some of them have been talked about for years about combining. So just go through some of the complications maybe related to that. Or
Anybody want to take that? Okay. I'm an auctioneer, by the way. I like to get close to my mouth. I know, and everybody knows, that for rural school districts, the district is really the heart of those communities, depending on how many there are. I'm from Blair-Taylor. Taught in Blair-Taylor. I'm from Whitehall, but I'm Blair-Taylor. We consolidated soon after, right before I first moved into Blair-Taylor, so it was consolidated. It's a decision that's local, and it's a decision that needs to be made together many times. If someone's considering consolidating, they usually have talked about it for 20, 30, 40 years. It's not something that just came up. However, it really comes to the brass tacks of it when you start talking about where and if it's possible. I can talk just a little bit about Greenwood and Loyal. They are considering it. They did go to a non-binding referendum question, and in that question, they thought it would be best that they consider consolidating. They've been in discussion for the last, honestly, long time, but the last 2 to 3 years has been tons of discussion before they even move forward with, let's get to the question. The next time that they do have a question, which I believe is in November, will be a binding question, whether they choose to do that. They are only 5 miles apart, but it has to work out. You have some districts way up north that it's just not feasible. You've got probably 600 square miles and another 800 square miles in each district. To be able to consolidate those two is very, very challenging. So each area, each district's different, and so that's why it needs to be a local decision for discussion if they even want to move in that direction. But that's why I say I'm for keeping local schools local. However, if together school districts decide they want to do a study, there's an opportunity with the bills. There's potential opportunity for that. There's so much more I could talk about, but I'll stop there.
So when a district consolidates, obviously they're trying to save money. Does it always work that way? Is it not that simple? Maybe talk a little bit about the cost.
I wish it was as simple as that. When they get to the brass tacks of it, maybe you're going to cut back in administration a little bit. But once that singular administrator, and I know myself, I had 3 hats in a school district. If we go to, if I consolidated with another district, one more, that makes it larger even, I can't wear 3 hats. I only can wear 1 hat. And now I have to hire somebody or get somebody else to do those other duties. So in some cases, it's not always really like saving tons of money that way. In Blair Taylor, we had definitely moved from like 5 school buildings to 4 school buildings to 2 school buildings to 1 united campus. Very similar to many districts. And yes, you are going to be more efficient at that point in time. We still needed to go to operational referendum. And a little side note on this, Loyal and Greenwood, when they did speak at the Capitol, when they did speak in public hearing, they both said, we will still need to go to operational referendum, even if we consolidate. We're hoping it's less, but we're not sure where that's going to be. But there can be savings.
And I would just add, and I think it's an obvious point, but the declining enrollment also has a lot to do with it. I mean, there wasn't always a financial part of it too. I mean, some districts you have a classroom, a 3rd grade classroom with 3 kids in the classroom because it's very rural. And again, is it at that point where does that make sense to not look into consolidation? So whether our funding and financial piece is connected to it, declining enrollment is definitely plays a role in all of this too.
For the room here, how many of you remember the closing of Liberty Pole? How many of you remember the closing of Chaseburg? We still hear about it. It's still very raw. And that's not a consolidation, that's just a reduction in a school. And it's still painful today.
Do you guys know, can you clarify on the declining enrollment, what that looks like in Vernon County, for instance? Like, what are your districts? I think Viroqua, you've added. You've gone up a little bit, is that right? No? You've gone down?
Every district in Vernon County has seen declining enrollment.
Okay. All right. This one has, it's a question related to voucher cost, I think, and they were trying to ask about, for instance, on a $100,000 property, what's the impact of vouchers? And obviously that varies by district, but maybe Viroqua has it, for instance, I don't know if you can get down to that $100,000 level, but, of your total tax levy, what's your total tax levy and how much of that leaves your district because of vouchers?
I would be guessing if I tried to guess what that total tax levy is, and Chris isn't here tonight to answer that question, but I can tell you that it's that 1.08 that leaves. And I think I want to make it clear, 1.08 doesn't come into us and we turn around and write a check for that 1.08 to somebody else. It's factored into what our total aid package is, and then what happens when it leaves, we have to figure out how to levy that back out the other way. So that's where it becomes a little tricky, right? That money doesn't come to us first. It never comes to us because it's set aside for those voucher students.
This might not get directly at the question, but just for a Cashton example, as a percentage of our tax levy, so our Fund 10 tax levy, the proportion that we needed to tax for private school vouchers was about 15% of our Fund 10 levy.
I think that's probably average.
Is that 1.5?
15%, 1.5.
This is a 2-part, and some of these I think are probably more directed at our legislators. But can anything be done about mandates that are not funded? And you kind of answered this already, but does anybody view consolidation as an answer? Do you think that's a solution?
I think it really does depend on the districts. I mean, and that's where the conversations start. 2 school boards get together and talk about their woes and things that are impacting their districts, and is it feasible? I do think that it makes sense, but it has to be in the right place and time. You talk about, again, up north, the geographical distances between one school and another up there, that probably should consolidate, but in the end, what those distances really cause a lot of issues and concerns. But I mean, I do think, again, I think what Wisconsin is mirrored and conversations have started around is around Iowa. Iowa has done some of those again. The lower K-8s, they start, I'm going to get it reversed. Is it the K-8s they combine and then they go to the separate high schools, or is it vice versa? Anyway, they have a model where they've, again, tried consolidation where it's not the whole district, but it's a part of the district, the elementary level, the K-8s, and then they feed her off into their own high school to keep their identity with their sports programs and those kind of things. Again, I think you just have to look at each community bringing the boards together and see if it makes sense for them. And again, the debt one district has versus the debt of another comes into play with that, because if you're consolidating, you're consolidating debt too. So there's just so many factors that come into play, but it doesn't start without, it has to start with a conversation.
And on that point, is there, I mean, some districts are already sharing some services, right? Or certainly athletics. Is there a middle ground there where you share services and you're not fully consolidated? Does that
There's certain examples that exist, and I don't know if you,
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. There's, because of shortage of teacher shortages, there's absolutely conversations happening and actually things happening where teachers teaching tech ed maybe or art, depending on the staff person, but they're definitely a shared. And again, I'm not putting a plug in, but that's where CESAs come into play too. If a district has occupational therapy, for example, in this region, you don't need, your school districts do not need a full-time occupational therapist. So instead, there's one occupational therapist that might go in between 4 or 5 different school districts. So, but I mean, so that does happen and it is happening. But again, when you don't have the staff that you need to begin with, the teacher shortage piece, that's just one more hurdle that they have to get over.
A couple more questions. Well, just a few more. We're past an hour already, so we'll wrap up here. But a couple of these are about legislative help, state level, federal level. And one of them specifically is about that budget surplus that's out there. You know, if you guys had a magic wand at the state level or the federal level, what would you like to see happen? I mean, what's going to help you not feel this stranglehold every year?
I'm just going to reiterate the special ed reimbursement, the special ed support. Any increase to special ed funding is going to help every district in the state.
And paired with that, I would say any scenario where there's an increase in the revenue limit, you know, in general, and the aid that backs that up. So you talk about whether it's 325 or 425 or whatever that number happens to be, those are dollars that we can then actually budget and apply to our programs, and then have that much less that we have to go back to communities and ask through referendum to override the revenue limit if the revenue limit is already set at the place that covers the needs of kids.
I would say an adjustment for inflation too would make a big difference. If we haven't had an adjustment for inflation since 2010, then that makes a big difference, because none of us are paying more now than we were in 2010 for anything, right? I think the other thing to talk about as far as special education funding goes, we talk about revenue limit kind of being that ceiling. Maintenance of effort from a special education standpoint is the floor. So basically what we're told is what we spend in special education this year, we have to guarantee from the local level we'll spend that same amount in special education next year. Otherwise, we're supplanting our budget versus supplementing our budget with federal dollars. So there are a couple ways that you can cut back from that. You know, if you have a ton of students graduate, then you're no longer needing to offer the services that you were offering. If you have highly qualified staff that retire, you can rearrange that way too. But if you don't put forth the same local effort in special education from year to year, you're penalized from that too. And sometimes you run the risk of not even being able to access those federal dollars.
Ditto to all that. I think Steve said it real well. There was no general increase at all this year. It was all on the tax base. It is very difficult to understand revenue limits. I could probably say it now. It's hard, difficult to say it before, but at one point in time, I went through the 0-0 when we had COVID and they had all this money, but yet they didn't have us any increase in the revenue limit or any at all. And that was tough when you got to that third year, but a lot of times we talk about operational referendums, but there are also times when, in my district, another district bordering us was receiving $1 million more in the shared revenue. So they could have the exact same amount of students that we had, but they were receiving $1 million more in the shared revenue. And so we eventually have to go to referendum to catch up. So it wasn't the fact that, yes, we're resourced, need more resources or money, but bottom line is other districts around us were already receiving those districts at that time. Now, I'm not going to pick on any one of the districts because I don't want to take anything away from anybody, but it was because we were that district that was very frugal in '93. And I can tell you the district administrator, because he's my mentor, he's awesome. But we were low, and to get that up a little bit more would be sometimes nice.
I think it's important too to say to Brad and Tara, thank you. We know that you guys fight for us. We are very lucky in Vernon County. Yep, I would give them a round of applause. We're very lucky in Vernon County that we have you guys supporting us and representing us there. But that for our voting base is great, but if they're not able to make the impact statewide because they have colleagues that don't come from communities that have this type of support, we have to somehow figure out how to mobilize other communities to understand the need to have hard conversations when it comes to education.
I would just add, and again, it's easier for me to say this because I don't have the face of a district. These gentlemen, are leaders of districts here. But I will say, from my standpoint, from a public education standpoint, funding two systems of a voucher system and a regular system in public education is also very difficult for us to overcome. And it's very clear they're trying to support two systems of funding, and that just takes away from funding from our public schools. There's a staggering statistic out there that says in very short term that there'll be 50% of our schools in the nation will be public schools. Only 50% of our schools in the nation will be public schools. And again, that's by 2030. Yep, by 2030. And that's a scary statistic for all of us. I'm rural, small town, born and raised. I love my little Alma Center. If we don't fight for our public schools and public education, and that's why I feel we're here tonight, and I feel this can be a bipartisan thing, I really do, but we have to fight for our public schools because that's what keeps our communities thriving, and if our schools aren't thriving, our communities aren't going to thrive. So appreciate that, and I'm not trying to summarize or wrap up here, but that's why we have to advocate for our public schools, because it also impacts our communities in which we live. So thank you so much for being here tonight.
So one more question on that area, and then I'll have one more to wrap up. But so the question was about what would you like to see in terms of reporting that voucher school tax dollars? How do you make that transparent for the public to let them know? Is you separate that out on the tax bill? What would you like to see happen there? I think there was legislation proposed to do that.
Yes. For the last decade, it has been proposed, but it's never even gotten a hearing.
Okay. So would that be a step forward, you think?
I think the transparency is always good to know where those funds are going. So any way we can make that transparent, but I think just making sure that there's policies and procedures in place, whether you're public, private, voucher, whatever it is, and we're all following the same. Again, it comes to accountability for our students. They're held that they have to report on their progress of their kids every year. Those in the other system, the private school voucher system, don't need to do that. So I mean, there's just a lot of ways in which we can level the field. If we truly want to say we're doing what's best for kids, then we should all be on the same page doing the same thing. So it just again, I don't know if others have thoughts on that, but it's the transparency is key. Whether you're public or private, everyone should be able to see what's happening behind scenes and out in front of everybody else.
All right. Wade had a question here, and one there. We'll take a couple more, and then we got to wrap up.
I just want to see if I can connect some dots. and I'm going to try to use math. I'm not good with numbers, so I'm going to use small numbers. So let's pretend we're talking about voucher funding. Let's pretend we've got a district that has 10 students, and suddenly vouchers come into play, and 4 students start using voucher funding to go to private schools. If those 4 students leave the public school district, as you explained, I think we can all wrap our heads around the idea that the money follows them to wherever they go, right? That seems fair. But you said that the statistic is actually closer to 25% of enrollees in private schools were previously enrolled in public schools.
So the couple of statistics that are floating out there right now, so this year's new enrollment, so people that enrolled this year, 25% are reported to have been in public schools prior. New enroll into private voucher schools had previously been in public school.
Proposing here, these 4 students that enroll in voucher schools, actually only one of them was previously enrolled in a public school, right? So they leave, that one leaves, and we expect that one person's funding to follow them. But you're actually paying for 4 new enrollees in the private voucher school system, even though only one of them came from your previous aid formula. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. So what you see there is that the tax base will be covering the education of more students in more schools. Because
they got funding for 10.
Yep, so it's not just money follows a student from public to private. It's money is following students from public to private, and it's joining private from taxpayers' pockets directly. So you are paying for 2 systems separately, and it's not just a matter of moving the money around. There's more money that needs to go into the equation to cover both systems.
One more question here, and then we got to wrap up.
Tim, I'm curious about unfunded mandates. What can we do to help make sure Act 25 is funded for districts so that you're not having to spend money to implement things? Most other states put in some sort of funding for 5 to 7 years to cover the costs of implementation. What can we do here to make sure Act 25 is funded?
Call your legislator. Sorry, guys.
And I would just say, where I would start in your superintendents that represent you do this very well, but talk to your legislators, talk about the financial impact that Act 20 had on your district, and say, I don't want to see this for Act 25. So you have to use concrete examples, tell your story, and again, that story is out there because Act 20 just happened. So we just spent this much on teacher training, we spent this much on materials, and then you're asking us to do this all over again with Act 25. That's really, again, just inform your legislators, give them the facts, give them the information, and that's really all we can do, and put it in their hands, and hopefully get it in the right hands and the right people fighting for us, and we can make a change. But that's really, you're telling your story, and each and every one of you, through a phone call, not a standard. So we work closely with our legislators. They don't want that standard email that everybody's sending the same one, or a standard letter. Tell them your story, tell them your piece, because otherwise they start, okay, this is the 50th one, this looks really familiar. Tell your story, show them your impact, and that's really how you're going to get to, in my opinion, to get this to change.
So this last question is kind of a nice broad one that kind of fits right in with that. We love our school. What can we do? So we threw a lot at these folks, very complicated. If you could have them go do something to help support you, what would you tell them to do?
I would talk about all the great stuff that you're seeing, because we have some phenomenal things happening in Vernon County and all of our public schools. Just share that story. I think it's about speaking positively about your school when you have a chance to do it. I think it's about setting the record straight when somebody quotes something that's not accurate. I think it's important to say, no, I think you got that wrong. Here's the reality. So, that'd be super.
Now's your chance, guys.
I totally support that comment, and just say, tell the story of your public school. So, tell your friends and your neighbors of the things that you're proud of, that you really value in the investment that people are making in the schools that we have. I firmly believe that schools are the heartbeat of most communities, and we're proud of what we do with and for kids on behalf of the families and the communities that we serve. There's fantastic stories, and there's things that we learn and grow through each experience every year. So I guess I would just ask that If you're proud of the work that you see of your schools, share that too, because we certainly get drowned out sometimes with the negative stories and the things that are, maybe headline grabbers, but day to day we have a number of people that are going to work every day that have committed their very best in their lives to support kids, to support families, and support communities. I'm proud of that, so thank you.
Yeah, I think I would echo that too. Our families are sending their very best kids to us every day, right? They're not keeping them home. They're sending their very best kids to us. And our teachers are showing up giving their very best to those kids. I think it's important to share with your neighbors that the district administrators, the teams of teachers are not deaf to the noise that is out there about public schools. We hear it. We are doing our very, very best every day to reinvent ourselves to be competitive with private schools and with voucher schools because it is the only way for us to survive. We know that we have to meet that challenge. We know that we have to be different because the students that we are educating today are different for a multitude of reasons. So I think I would share with your neighbors that we are not deaf to that. We hear it. We welcome that conversation. We want them to partner with us to help figure that out.
I agree wholeheartedly. We are reinventing, adjusting, changing, making changes. Matter of fact, and I'll tell you, rural school districts across the state do an incredible job of staying on the grind and doing great things for kids across the board. Yes, we need to make sure we're saying all the positive things and share those stories. We also have to say, please help us with the unfunded mandates. Please help us with the things we're trying to get done and accomplish for our kids. Support our kids across the state with that so that we can continue doing great things for kids, because I can tell you the economy isn't based off of just a few areas. It's based across the state. And when you have 70% of the districts in rural areas, okay, maybe not all the kids are there, but 70% of the districts are supporting rural kids. We need to make sure that those people are able to get the resources they need across the board. But we are really good at overcoming so many things. I've seen it over and again, but we also need that support. Yeah.
And I'll make a suggestion. Pay attention to the budget process. Go to the budget meetings. Sandy, every year the budget passes, how many people are there? 1 or 2? 0? And that's really hard to do. And that's what I'm trying to do, with what I'm doing with trying to get information out to people, because folks are busy. You guys are busy, and you like to have somebody sum that up for you so you don't have to sit through those meetings. So that's what I'm trying to do. But usually the budget meetings, there's nobody there. So pay attention. They usually put out some really good documentation around budget time, trying to explain this, but it is complicated. So, yep, Christina.
I just want to make a shameless plug. I have a Facebook group called Vernon County Public Education Advocates, and I just try to share information. And if anybody wants to talk about this, I will talk your ear off. So
That's true.
Because they can't put themselves out there. We have to do it for them. So we have to be the ones educating our community. We have to be the ones talking to our legislators. We have to be the ones going to Madison and showing up for our schools. So come talk.
All right, we won't keep you any longer. Thank you so much for coming out on a very cold night to talk about finances. Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.